I am Grady Collane in the CapeCod.com News Center, and welcome to Sunday Journal. Today I'm joined by a special guest from Falmouth. Do you mind introducing yourself, for our listeners?
Hi, Grady. Mike Renshaw, Town Manager, Town of Falmouth.
Awesome. Thank you for coming into the studio today. Have this conversation.
Pleasure to be with you.
So you are stepping into this new role. Wanted to catch up, see what some of your plans are, tell a little bit more about what you're expecting in the short term as well as the long term. But first things first, how long have you been in the role now?
So just completing my 6th week, so not a whole long time. It's been a fantastic transition. First experience working in the Commonwealth, and certainly the first on the Cape. I do have coastal management experience. For about 6 years, I worked in Camden County, North Carolina, Outer Banks community, and off the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So really enjoyed that. I was looking at this stage of my career for an opportunity to get back to coastal management and that kind of vibe and environment. And I have not been disappointed with the town of Falmouth. It's been fantastic.
A very coastal environment here for the Cape Cod region, the quintessential, really. So what strikes you as unique so far about Falmouth? Is it different from North Carolina? Or?
So the first thing is the amount of traffic. The summer visitors have been tremendous, and we love it because it's a sign of a vibrant economy. So we certainly do love it, but you just have to do a lot of planning in terms of travel time, making sure that you give yourself enough lead time to get to where you're going, because the traffic in Falmouth this time of year is...
yes.
There's a lot of cars on the road and a lot of pedestrians downtown.
Indeed. Got to be careful, got to be safe, but it is interesting to note. I definitely wanted to touch on the... So are you familiar with the that summer swell for the busy summer season on Cape Cod? Is that different from other communities you've experienced?
So the magnitude is probably different than what I saw on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. We saw traffic, but not to the extent that we have it here in Falmouth. The staff, however, do a tremendous job, I think, kind of processing that traffic and getting people to where they need to be safely.
That is fantastic. It'd be very interesting to have another conversation again in about 8 months' time when we get into the winter months and you're like, oh, where did everybody go? No one lives. But at any rate, so it's 6 weeks in, so I'm sure I'm going to hit you with a lot of questions that might not have answers just yet. But what are your general long-term goals? What research are you doing? Data collecting? What's first on the platter for you?
So one of the first initiatives that I've talked to Select Board, the 5-member governing body with Town of Falmouth, and the staff, the department heads, is looking to do a better job of overseeing and kind of managing projects.
Sure.
The town of Falmouth has a lot of great capital projects that are underway. However, that requires a certain amount of accountability and oversight to really kind of manage the projects and coming on time and on budget, delivering the projects. So we're putting together a dashboard report that we're going to be presenting to the Select Board every quarter, so every 3 months. Staff and I will present topics, the different capital projects that are underway, kind of let Select Board know and the community at large kind of the status of the projects. If there's any delays, what possibly are the reasons for those delays and how we're tracking.
Have you had enough time to really connect with some of the town staff yet? Are you still working?
I have. So I have about 25 direct reports, department heads and division heads that report directly to my office. And I've had one large department head meeting with those staff. And again, they've been very accepting of me. First time being in Massachusetts, obviously managing and coming from the Southeast primarily. Different experiences and different styles, perhaps. This is my first position where I'm working with Select Board and particularly the representative town meeting. We have about 45 different boards and committees in the town of Falmouth, and that's probably not dissimilar to some of the other Cape communities with regards to the number of committees. But working with those groups, that's really what attracted me to the position, knowing that we have that much volunteer spirit, that volunteerism on the Cape and in Massachusetts in general has been really refreshing to me. And working with those folks and just kind of tapping in and utilizing and leveraging their knowledge and their skills has been fantastic.
That is great to know. I assume many people, but myself included, oftentimes forget that we have a somewhat unique system of government here on Cape Cod compared to other locations with the town meetings and whatnot.
It's fantastic. It really is. Again, I'm a big proponent, advocate for engagement and engaging with the community and involving them in the decision-making process, and know place else that I've ever managed is that more true than here in Cape Cod.
Very interesting. Good to hear from someone who's got that outsider kind of perspective and a lot of experience in other communities. So as well, you're kind of hitting the ground running. We've had some recent changes at the state level with Title V septic regulations, and I am familiar that there's a bit of a unique challenge when it comes to Falmouth in this regard that you're going to be stepping into. Can you elaborate for our listeners?
There are some unique challenges. As some of the listeners may know, Falmouth has 14 estuaries, which I've been told is the largest amount of estuaries on the Cape. And those challenges, basically, with the new Title V and watershed permitting regulations that just came out July 7th, I believe, the intent, I understand that, is to kind of expedite and ramp up Cape communities' abilities to lower nitrogen levels and loads in the estuaries. The challenges that presents for a relatively small town with relatively, not modest means is the speed at which you can meet those new regulations and the new limits. So basically, in effect, Grady, it's taking what was a 35-year plan that the town had planned out in terms of sewering and reducing those nitrogen loads, and condense that down to less than a 20-year period to get to accomplish the same thing. So with that, tremendous amount of cost involved. And staff and I are just now analyzing and evaluating the different options. The first involves kind of a best practice, best standards septic system treatment. That burden would fall primarily on the 13,000 homeowners in town of Falmouth. The other option is that the town itself would apply for watershed permits to be able to treat the nitrogen primarily through wastewater treatment facilities.
Now, either way, it's going to end up presumably being a costly endeavor. But I believe they had mentioned that there's ways to also re-up the watershed permit, so it can be extended out. Do you think you'd be like, this is, I'm assuming, immediately becoming a multi-decade plan that you have to formulate? And
it will be. And there's some elements and provisions that as long as the community is showing significant reasonable progress towards achieving their goals, that they would extend those out a bit. I think that may be what you're referring to. But I think the real critical part of it for the town of Falmouth and other Cape communities is those communities that have had plans, capital improvement plans, to address the nitrogen load in estuaries. It's just going to require those communities to kind of do that a lot more quickly than what they had projected. And then finding funding to line up and meet those challenges and demands.
Now, as well, we've talked a little bit about the summer season and also some of the ways of generating revenue. But with Falmouth being so close to the water, and also with Woods Hole, we have the terminals. It's a very water-based economy there. Do you think that this is going to be something a little bit more crucial, given how many estuaries are in that area, that this is almost an economic change as well when it comes to the septic?
That's a great question. I think there certainly are some economic ramifications and implications behind it for a community like Falmouth. You mentioned Woods Hole. I just had a great tour there yesterday, walked around the community and got a sense for the Institute, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute specifically.
Yes.
Great facilities, and they're obviously being right on the water, concerned with sea level rise and climate change, and I learned quite a bit yesterday during my tour of kind of what their plans are at the Institute, their facilities, raising those buildings literally up to address sea level rise and climate change.
They've had it seems to be an ongoing relationship with the town. I've seen them at the select board meetings giving reports and whatnot. What do you think of that partnership? Is that something new or unique to you? Or?
It's unique in some aspects. Obviously internationally known, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, but the partnership has been tremendous between the Institute and the town. An example recently of that, we just signed off a letter of support for some grant funding. The project is called Resilient Woods Hole, and it's basically one of the projects they're doing right now that I think is really neat. They're doing a walking trail with kind of some interpretive signage and posts, basically so that people can walk around. I think there's 13 different stations perhaps, and basically on their cell phones with the QR code, download information. And talks about, again, climate change, sea level rise, some of the impacts that's having in that specific community.
Forgive the segue, but just I don't know, how long have you been in town government in general?
So about 30 years. The last 15 of which is either a city or a county manager, but 30 years in public sector, local government.
Okay. Just as you mentioned, those QR codes, I am very curious about how other locations, as well as over time, how things have changed digitally, especially following COVID, that elephant in the room where we still kind of to live with. How have things changed? Has there been 3 decades of experience? What's new?
So the one thing I can certainly point to, and most of the listeners will realize this as well, is with the pandemic and the requirements to do a lot of our meetings and public interactions remotely. So obviously that whole interface was brand new to me, to my generation growing up in public sector, local government, having to flip that switch, so to speak, and start right away. And finding ways to address remote meetings, public meetings, was a challenge. But I think for the most part, local governments did a fantastic job meeting that challenge.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it provides more opportunity for residential input, essentially, on that front?
I think there is opportunity. A lot of public comments now are done online via forms and whatnot, so I think there does provide some opportunity. That being said, I've always preferred face-to-face interactions and opening town hall back up to public meetings, so I think it's a great thing that we've been able to do that as well.
Understandable. To that effect, are you looking forward to that first town meeting, essentially, where you can see all the voters themselves?
So November 13th is our first fall November town meeting, and I am looking forward to that. That's going to be kind of my segue. This portion obviously is the capital budgeting portion of it that we'll be introducing to town meeting, but I'm looking forward to it.
Sure. So speaking of the seasonality as well as kind of planning for November, what does June, August, September look like for you as town manager?
So June, July, and August, again, adjusting to a new community, getting myself out there, trying to engage with the public as much as I can. I mentioned the committees and boards. We have 45. I think I've been able to meet physically and personally with half of those. So I'm getting there. But that's taken up a lot of my time, just kind of understanding the lay of the land, so to speak, meeting with staff, getting up to speed myself personally on the projects that are underway. I mentioned the capital projects that we have, very significant projects, just making sure that we're marshaling those and keeping those on track and on schedule. That's kind of taken up my time for the first month and a half so far, but it will certainly lead into the fall, September season.
Understandable. So as well, there's a lot of major issues that are facing the entire region, not just Falmouth. But I wanted to get your rough thoughts. I know 6 weeks in, I don't want to overwhelm or ask the crystal ball questions, but there's things like broadband access as well as housing, affordable housing. We mentioned a little bit off mic before already, talking more about workforce housing. Do you have thoughts there, ideas there? Where are we now with Falmouth? So
certainly one of the larger challenges that the town of Falmouth and other Cape communities are dealing with is attainable workforce housing and providing for that. Currently the town is working, engaging in some dialogue with some developers, some larger multifamily 40B projects. I think that's one path and one avenue. I think there's an opportunity for some maybe public-private partnerships as well. Other communities that I've managed in over the years, including out west in Colorado, a lot of entities, organizations are purchasing their own housing and then using that for workforce housing, their own workforce. So I think there's, whether it's deed restriction programs, I think there's a lot of opportunities to kind of get creative and think outside the box. And it's just a tremendous need with the volume of folks that have to commute into Falmouth from off Cape. I don't know the exact percentages or number, but I know that volume is pretty significant. So we're trying to make it more affordable, provide more opportunities, I should say, for attainable workforce, affordable housing, quality housing, to allow our workforce not to have to commute over an hour to get to work every day.
Yeah, the Bourne Bridge is right there, but once you go around Buzzards Bay, if you're up in Wareham, it can get a little bit difficult sometimes.
It can, and that's what I've been told.
Yeah. Speaking of outside the box, Provincetown recently has just been making purchases of land for affordable housing themselves, including repurposing potentially old police station. Do you think that there might be some creative solutions that are on the docket in that regard? Or
wow, so I hadn't heard of that specific example, but I can tell you right now our planning staff is working with a developer that's looking at repurposing, for lack of a better term, a previous assisted living facility and turning that into affordable workforce housing.
Very interesting.
With some local preference options maybe for the folks that would live there.
We've been hearing, especially with Hyannis did some zoning bylaw changes recently as well, and they were talking about reutilizing underutilized properties. A lot of these things that they're not being used by anyone currently. Do you think that Falmouth might have a few opportunities there, just in terms of old properties, disused properties?
I think there may be some opportunities. I mean, that's something that certainly I don't think you can become myopic and look at just one solution. I think it's kind of a multifaceted. You have to look at a bunch of different options, I think, to be successful in this area. So I think there would be some opportunity for Falmouth to look at underutilized properties,
Mm-hmm.
certainly.
It's very interesting. Thank you so much for commenting on these bigger issues that I know have only 6 weeks to get into so far. But speaking of those capital improvement plans, some of those 5-year plans and really long-term stuff, can you talk more about what's things that you've inherited and things that you know is on the docket for the next few years potentially?
Sure. Well, we've mentioned one in terms of wastewater treatment, expanding our sewer treatment system and facility.
Sure.
The collection and the treatment is going to be huge for us over the next, well, now it's going to be a lot sooner than what we perhaps thought. With the new Title V regulations, if we go down that path of looking at the watershed permitting, that will be a under 20-year kind of a commitment for us. So certainly there's, in the upcoming years, we actually have a 10-year capital improvement plan with the town of Falmouth. So in that plan, that we'll be talking at town meeting in November regarding it, there's some funds in there made available for wastewater treatment, specifically to address the new Title V regulations.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for answering all these questions. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you wanted to highlight for our listeners while I still have you on workshops, initiatives, anything else?
Well, I appreciate the time with you today, Grady. It's been great. Just want to let the folks know in Falmouth and outside, the folks that may visit Falmouth, how excited I am to be here, and it's really a great opportunity. I'm looking forward to being here for a long time.
Awesome. Mr. Renshaw, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thanks.
I'm Grady Collane, and this has been Sunday Journal.